On Thursday, May 3rd, 2007, at about 6 in the evening in Spokane, Washington, my mother and father had a fierce argument. Fights and conflict were rare for them and never lasted long. They had been married 39 years. They had a happy marriage. My father said, "If you want me to go, then I'll really go." He went upstairs. A few minutes later, my mother followed. She found him sitting on the end of their bed, his eyes unfocused, his head and shoulders sagging. "What did you do?" she shouted. "I took some pills," my father answered. "You won't have to worry about me anymore." My mother went into the bathroom. All the bottles from the medicine cabinet, a pharmacy's worth of drugs, including the Ativan and Trazodone my mother took for bipolar disorder, were out and open and empty on the counter. She called 911. The last thing my father ever wanted was to be a character in a melodrama. He did not want to step on stage at 66, his hair gray, a small paunch over his belt, and play the tragic lead. He wanted to drink Coca-Cola and watch Jeopardy, and listen to the Kingston Trio to bowl and play cribbage with my mother, to read science fiction novels and watch movies with explosions, to work as a speech pathologist in a nursing home, helping the elderly to speak again and swallow soft foods like yogurt and rice pudding. 2 days later, on the 5th floor of the psychiatric ICU of Spokane's Sacred Heart Hospital, after my father had spent 36 hours in a coma on a ventilator, the intubation tube was removed from his throat. His head back on his pillow, his eyes closed, his face pale, he slowly regained consciousness. He recognized me, gripping his hand, touching his forehead. The agony etched on his wrinkled face was clear. He did not want to be alive. For hours, my father would not speak. Tears leaked slowly from his eyes. For the past 2 days, my mother had refused to tell me why he had done this. "Your father will have to tell you himself." She could hardly look at me. She said this each time I asked, and I asked more than a few times. She said this even in the first hours after his suicide attempt, when it wasn't clear if he would pull through, as if she was willing to let him take his reasons to the grave. Now I told my father I loved him, and he mouthed the words, "You won't." My father told me 2 things that day, 2 revelations, which I had never once suspected. He told me that for 10 years, from the time he was 4 until he was 14, his father had molested him. His voice broke as he said this. He hesitated and looked wildly about the room. I moved toward him. My father held up his hand. "I'm not done." He then said that he had been having anonymous affairs for as long as he and my mother had been married, for 39 years. All of these affairs were with men. He was gay. My father cried as he spoke. I cried with him. I told him I was grateful he was alive. For the next half hour or so, I sat with my father beside his bed, or my mother sat at his side talking to him in a quiet voice and holding his hand and stroking his thin gray hair, or she stood at the edge of the room, her mouth in a tight line, her arms crossed, her eyes far away.